In the heart of the United States, there was an old and prestigious restaurant, known not only for its fine cuisine but also for its haunting reputation. This restaurant was located in a small town in the northeastern part of the country and had gained fame for being one of the first establishments to serve traditional American dishes. The building itself was over a century old, having undergone many renovations over the years. However, something that never seemed to change was the eerie presence that lingered in the restaurant. It was said that this restaurant was once home to one of the region's most famous chefs, Jonathan Harper. Jonathan joined their restaurant in the 1850s and took on the role of head chef. He was known for his dedication to his craft, often working tirelessly behind the scenes, and he was a perfectionist who kept a serious demeanor while working in the kitchen. Many patrons who dined there recalled that Jonathan never smiled and appeared deeply focused on his work. However, the event that occurred toward the end of his life would forever separate him from his culinary legacy. One chilly autumn night, while working in the kitchen, Jonathan tragically passed away in a bizarre accident. Some say he suffered severe burns after a mishap with kitchen equipment. Others claim he had a fatal heart attack from the stress of his intense workload. Whatever the cause, Jonathan's death was sudden and devastating for both the staff and the patrons. However, what followed after his death led to countless eerie tales that would be passed down through generations. New employees who joined the restaurant began reporting strange occurrences they couldn't explain. A young worker, new to the establishment, claimed that they would often hear footsteps in the kitchen at night when the restaurant was quiet and empty. These footsteps seemed to come from the upper floors, where no one was supposed to be. Every time the employee would rush to check, there would be no one in sight. One of the restaurant's longest-serving employees, who had been working there for over 25 years, shared that he too had experienced unsettling incidents. He recalled one night, while cleaning a section of the kitchen, he suddenly felt a strange sensation, as if something had touched him from behind. He quickly turned around, but there was no one there. However, the cold feeling he experienced in that moment led him to believe that an unseen force was present in the restaurant. Another chilling report came from the kitchen staff. They claimed that in the late hours of the night, when no one else was around, they would find kitchen tools and utensils mysteriously moved. Some of the staff even reported seeing knives and forks sliding across the counters by themselves. These incidents only intensified the belief that something supernatural was at play. Perhaps the most chilling of all the stories came from a patron who claimed to have witnessed something truly bizarre. One evening, while enjoying his meal, he noticed something odd out of the corner of his eye. Looking toward the window, he saw a dark shadowy figure moving inside the kitchen. The man immediately left the restaurant in fear and never returned. As time went on, these stories began to spread, and many believed that the spirit of Jonathan Harper still haunted the restaurant. Some diners claimed to feel as though someone was watching them during their meal, and when they would glance around, no one would be in sight. Others reported hearing faint whispers or the soft sound of footsteps following them as they walked through the restaurant. Despite the airy tales, the restaurant's popularity grew even further, as people from all over came to witness the strange occurrences for themselves. Whether these events were truly caused by a restless spirit or were simply the result of the overactive imaginations of those who worked and dined there, the restaurant remained one of the most mysterious places in town. In 1998, a small diner in a quiet Illinois town started to gain attention, not for its food, but for the unnerving stories shared by its staff and customers. The diner was a cozy establishment, tucked away on a dimly lit street, serving traditional American dishes. But beneath its charming exterior, it carried a dark, eerie presence that no one could quite explain. The strange occurrences began subtly. Waitstaff would find silverware mysteriously rearranged on tables they had just set. Glasses would topple over without reason, and the jukebox in the corner would start playing songs on its own, even when unplugged. One cook swore he saw a shadow dart past the kitchen doorway late one night, but when he investigated, the space was empty. These incidents were unnerving, but the staff shrugged them off as mere coincidences. Things took a darker turn when Sarah, a young waitress, decided to work a late shift to cover for a co-worker. The night started uneventfully, with only a few customers trickling in. By 10 p.m., the diner was empty, and Sarah locked the doors, preparing to clean up for the night. The silence of the diner felt heavier than usual, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As she wiped down the counter, she heard faint footsteps coming from above her. The diner, however, didn't have a second floor. She froze, straining to hear. The footsteps grew louder, as if someone was pacing directly above her. Gathering her courage, she yelled, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Her voice echoed in the empty diner, but there was no response. Trying to dismiss the sound as her imagination, Sarah continued cleaning. Moments later, she felt an icy breeze sweep past her, even though the windows were shut, and the air conditioning was off. Her unease deepened, but she pushed through her tasks, eager to finish and leave. As she moved toward the storage room, Sarah noticed something out of the corner of her eye. Near the far end of the diner, at one of the booths, sat a man. He was tall, dressed in a sharp black suit that seemed outdated, like something from the 1940s. His face was paled, his expression blank, and his eyes fixated on Sarah. She hadn't heard the door open or seen anyone enter, and she was certain she had locked up earlier. "Sir? The diner is closed," she said, her voice trembling. The man didn't respond. He simply stared, unblinking. Sarah felt her heart race as a cold sweat formed on her forehead. She mustered her courage and stepped closer, but as she did, the man slowly faded, disappearing before her eyes. All that remained was the faint smell of cigar smoke lingering in the air. Terrified, Sarah grabbed her belongings and left the diner in a rush, leaving the rest of the cleaning undone. The next day, she told her co-workers about the encounter, but most dismissed it as stress or fatigue playing tricks on her mind. However, a few older employees exchanged uneasy glances. Intrigued and desperate for answers, Sarah began researching the building's history. She discovered that during the 1920s, the diner had been a speakeasy, a secret bar during Prohibition. It was a hot spot for shady dealings and had been the site of a violent shootout between rival gangs. Several men had died in the altercation, their bodies never officially identified. After learning this, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the man she saw was one of those unfortunate souls, forever tied to the diner where he met his end. Over the years, other staff members reported similar sightings, a man in a black suit sitting silently in the booths or standing at the counter. Some claimed to hear faint jazz music playing late at night, while others described the unmistakable scent of cigars wafting through the air. The diner eventually closed its doors in 2005, unable to shake its haunted reputation. Locals still share stories of the eerie happenings, and some claim to see faint lights flickering inside the abandoned building at night. To this day, no one knows exactly who, or what, haunts the diner, but those who work there will never forget the chilling presence that seemed to lurk in its shadows. In 2012, a family-owned Italian restaurant in rural Pennsylvania became the talk of the town. Known for its homemade pasta and warm ambience, it had been a community favorite for decades. But for as long as the restaurant had existed, rumors about strange occurrences had also circulated. Staff and regular patrons whispered about a ghostly presence, a waitress who never seemed to leave. The stories began with small incidents. Waiters would hear soft humming coming from the empty dining room, particularly after closing hours. Glasses stacked perfectly would tumble over without reason, and chairs would sometimes be found rearranged in the morning. Most of the staff laughed it off as typical old building quirks. That is, until the sightings began. One of the first documented encounters occurred late one night when the restaurant manager, Alex, stayed behind to count the day's earnings. It was well past midnight, and the restaurant was locked. As Alex sat at the bar, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Glancing up, he saw a young woman in a vintage waitress uniform walking across the dining room. She wore a pale blue dress with a white apron, her hair pinned back in curls, as if she had stepped out of the 1950s. "Excuse me. Who are you?" Alex called out, confused. The woman didn't respond or even turn to look at him. Instead, she continued walking toward the kitchen, disappearing through the door. Alarmed, Alex rushed after her, but when he entered the kitchen, it was empty. All the doors were locked, and there was no sign of anyone. The encounter left Alex shaken, but he kept it to himself, worried that no one would believe him. The sightings became more frequent after that. Several employees reported seeing the same woman, always in the same vintage uniform. Some claimed she would appear in the dining room during busy hours, blending in so seamlessly that customers assumed she was part of the staff. But when approached, she would vanish before their eyes. One waiter, Mark, even swore she had once handed him a tray of drinks, only for him to realize moments later that no one else had seen her. The most chilling encounter occurred on a stormy evening in late October. The restaurant was nearly empty, with only a handful of customers seated. Among them was an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. They were regulars who had been dining at the restaurant for over 30 years. That night, they requested a specific table near the window and were served by a friendly waitress in a vintage uniform. The couple later complimented the manager on the waitress's excellent service, describing her as polite, attentive, and cheerful. The manager, puzzled, explained that no one on the staff wore such a uniform. When the couple insisted, the manager checked the security cameras. To everyone's shock, the footage showed the couple speaking and gesturing as if someone was at their table, but there was no one there. Plates and drinks seemed to float on their own, as if carried by invisible hands. The incident spurred a deeper investigation into the restaurant's history. It turned out that the building had once been a popular diner in the 1950s. A tragic fire had broken out one night, killing a young waitress named Lily who had been working late to cover a friend's shift. She was known for her kindness and dedication to her job, and locals speculated that her spirit had remained tied to the place she had loved so dearly. Despite the eerie happenings, the restaurant continued to thrive, with some customers even visiting in hopes of catching a glimpse of Lily. The owners eventually embraced the legend, framing a photograph of the old diner staff, including Lily, and hanging it near the entrance. Guests would often point to her in the photo, remarking on how much she resembled the ghostly figure they had seen. To this day, the restaurant remains open, and the stories of Lily's ghost endure. While some find her presence unsettling, others see it as a comforting reminder of the past, a waitress who loved her job so much that not even death could keep her away. In 1994, a family-owned restaurant in New Orleans became infamous for a particular table that seemed to bring misfortune to anyone who sat at it. The restaurant, which had been operating for over 50 years, was known for its delicious Cajun seafood and festive atmosphere. But one table, located in the corner of the dining room, had earned a reputation for something far darker than its view. The tale of the cursed table began in the 1960s, when wealthy businessman named Harold Williams came to the restaurant for a private dinner meeting. Harold was a regular customer, often hosting important meetings and celebrations at the restaurant. On that particular evening, he was seated at the corner table by the window. It was a quiet, intimate setting, perfect for conducting business away from the bustle of the restaurant. As the evening went on, Harold became more and more agitated. He was seen arguing with his dinner companion, a local banker, over something that seemed serious. The two men's voices rose, and suddenly, Harold stood up, knocking over his glass of wine in the process. The next few moments were a blur, but in the chaos, Harold collapsed to the floor, clutching his chest. He died of a heart attack right there at the table. His body crumpled onto the floor as the diners around him screamed for help. The event shocked the staff and patrons, and the table was eventually cleared away, but the incident was never forgotten. From that night on, strange things began happening whenever anyone sat at Harold's table. The first occurrence was a series of unexplainable accidents. A couple who sat at the table just weeks after Harold's death reported that the food they ordered was served cold, despite the kitchen confirming it was freshly prepared. The woman also claimed to feel an oppressive weight on her chest, as if she couldn't breathe. They hurriedly finished their meal and left, but the man later collapsed in the parking lot, suffering a minor heart attack. As the years passed, more incidents occurred. Patrons who sat at the table experienced unexplained nausea, dizziness, and a sense of dread. Some even claimed they saw a figure in a dark suit standing near the table, though no one was ever there. The staff began to notice that certain customers who sat there would later encounter serious misfortunes, business failures, health problems, and even accidents. In 1987, a woman named Linda and her fiancé, Tom, decided to dine at the infamous table. They had heard the stories but were skeptical. Linda had always been intrigued by the supernatural and dismissed the rumors as nothing more than local folklore. But that night, things took a terrifying turn. As they were finishing their dessert, Linda began to feel a cold breeze and heard a faint whisper in her ear. She turned to look, but there was no one nearby. Her fiancé laughed it off, thinking it was just her imagination. However, as they were leaving, Linda fainted on the steps outside the restaurant. When she regained consciousness, she was confused and disoriented. The restaurant's manager, seeing what had happened, hurried over to help, but something in Linda's eyes had changed. She couldn't remember her own name or where she was. It took hours for her to recover fully, and even then, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The final incident came in 1994 when a well-known local journalist, Mark Thompson, sat at the cursed table while interviewing the restaurant's owner for a feature story. Mark was a skeptic, known for his rational, no-nonsense approach to life. He scoffed at the tales of the haunted table, convinced they were mere superstitions. But when he sat down to eat, he immediately felt an overwhelming sense of unease. His food tasted off, and his heart began racing uncontrollably. He excused himself to the restroom, but as he looked into the mirror, he saw the reflection of a man in a dark suit standing behind him. Mark spun around, but no one was there. Panicked, he rushed out of the restaurant, but on his way home, he was involved in a serious car accident. Miraculously, he survived, but he was left with lifelong injuries and a newfound belief in the curse of the table. In the years that followed, the restaurant owner, desperate to rid the place of its dark history, attempted to remove the table and replace it with a new one. However, no matter what they did, the same cursed events continued to happen whenever someone sat in the corner. Eventually, the restaurant decided to leave the table undisturbed, but it was no longer offered to customers as a seating option. To this day, the restaurant remains open, but locals know better than to sit at the cursed table. It has become a part of the city's haunted lore, a reminder of the tragic events that unfolded there and the supernatural force that still lingers. Visitors who are brave enough to sit near the corner table often report a strange sense of coldness and discomfort, and some swear they can still feel Harold Williams' presence in the air. In 2003, a trendy French bistro in downtown Los Angeles gained a reputation for its exceptional cuisine and its eerie encounters in the kitchen. The restaurant, known for its sophisticated ambience and innovative dishes, was frequented by celebrities and food critics alike. However, behind the culinary masterpieces and polished service, there was an unsettling story, one that began with an experienced chef who tragically passed away in the very kitchen where he had worked for years. The chef, Bernard Lemoine, was a perfectionist. Born and raised in Paris, he moved to Los Angeles to pursue his dream of running his own restaurant. He quickly gained a reputation for his culinary skills, and the bistro became one of the most sought-after dining spots in the city. Bernard's meticulous nature and passion for food were reflected in every dish, and his commitment to his craft was evident in his long hours at the stove. But his dedication came at a price. Bernard was known to be a difficult and temperamental man, often demanding perfection from his staff and pushing them to their limits. One night, during the busy dinner rush, Bernard collapsed in the kitchen while preparing a souffle. His sous chef, who was with him at the time, attempted to revive him, but Bernard was gone. The restaurant was devastated by his sudden death, and the kitchen was never the same without him. Staff members were left shaken, and many speculated that the stress and long hours had taken a toll on Bernard's health. The restaurant owner, who had grown close to Bernard over the years, decided to dedicate the next month's menu in his honor, hoping to give the bistro a sense of closure. But the strange event started soon after. It began with small things. Knives would be found moved, as if someone had been using them, even though the kitchen was empty. Pots and pans would rattle late at night when no one was around, and sometimes, the smell of Bernard's signature dishes would waft through the kitchen, despite no one cooking. The staff shrugged it off, chalking it up to the natural creaks and sounds of an old building. However, the phenomena grew more persistent. A few months after Bernard's death, the head chef, Rachel, who had been brought in to replace him, reported feeling an odd presence in the kitchen. One evening, while working late, Rachel felt a cold breeze sweep across her face as she chopped vegetables for the night's specials. She turned around, expecting to see one of her sous chefs, but no one was there. Her heart raced as she looked around the kitchen, feeling a sense of unease that she couldn't explain. The next day, she found the mise en place she had carefully arranged the night before completely disorganized. Items that had been perfectly placed on the counter were now scattered, as though someone had been moving them around. Rachel wasn't the only one who experienced these strange occurrences. One of the line cooks, Tom, began hearing a voice calling his name from the kitchen during late-night prep. The voice sounded almost like a soft whisper, but when he looked around, no one was there. One evening, he swore he saw the figure of a tall man in a chef's uniform standing by the stove. The figure was not fully visible, but the outline was unmistakable. Tom quickly turned away, convinced he had just imagined it, but the sensation of being watched lingered. The most chilling experience came when a well-known food critic, Anthony Collins, visited the bistro for a review. Collins was notorious for his harsh critiques and had a reputation for never being impressed by anything. That night, the restaurant was packed, and the kitchen was working at full speed. As Bernard's former colleagues prepared the dishes, they noticed something strange. Each plate that went out had an uncanny resemblance to the dishes Bernard had made during his time at the restaurant. The flavors, the presentation, the exact details, they were all perfect, just as Bernard had done them. But when Collins tasted the dishes, he was visibly shaken. This is Bernard's food," he muttered, looking around the kitchen. The staff was puzzled. How could the food taste so much like Bernard's cooking when the chef was no longer there? Collins immediately asked to speak to the chef, but when he entered the kitchen, there was no one there. The door swung open by itself, and the kitchen was empty. He left without a word, and the review he wrote later was unlike any other he had ever written, a glowing account of a restaurant whose dishes seemed to be prepared by an invisible hand. Word of the ghostly presence in the kitchen began to spread, and soon, the restaurant became a topic of local lore. Some customers claimed to have seen Bernard's shadowy figure in the kitchen window late at night. Others said they could smell the scent of freshly baked bread or the rich aroma of garlic butter in the air, even when the restaurant was closed. Staff members continued to report the feeling of being watched and the occasional sound of a whisk stirring or knife slicing on its own. The restaurant owner, desperate for answers, had a medium come in to conduct a seance. The medium claimed to make contact with Bernard's spirit, who, according to the medium, had not left the kitchen because of his intense love for the craft of cooking. He was still tied to the kitchen, unable to move on because of his unfinished work. The medium assured the owner that Bernard's spirit meant no harm, only wanted to keep the kitchen alive and thriving. Though the incidents did not stop entirely, they seemed to become less frequent after the seance. The staff began to embrace the idea that Bernard was still with them, watching over the kitchen and guiding them to create the perfect dishes. To this day, some of the longtime employees swear that Bernard still makes his presence known in the kitchen, ensuring that every meal is prepared to perfection. The bistro continues to operate and remains a beloved spot for food enthusiasts, though visitors are often left with the feeling that something otherworldly is at play. The ghostly chef, Bernard, has become part of the restaurant's history, a spectral presence that ensures the legacy of his culinary genius lives on.